Hey everyone, welcome back to Cryption XYZ. As I mentioned earlier in the intro, we have Shai on today. Me and Shai work together at AWS. Shai is the global tech lead at Web3 in AWS. Today we're going to walk through some different concepts that we debated quite a lot during my time at AWS and dissect them.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. I'm definitely eager to get into these because I think there's always so many topics that we can talk about that it's important to give different perspectives and different angles into it. So let's get started.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I think it's quite a funny story about how I reached out to you. I believe I just literally found you on Phone Tool and saw Web3 and sent you an email. I was like, hey, can we have a chat? And you're more than happy to take that conversation. But
yeah, I don't see no good often.
Yeah. And sorry, for context also, we're both wearing Argentina shirts because Shai is from Argentina, and obviously they are the greatest world champions. So yes, that's some context on the shirts. Although we have the descriptions and we have the intros, I'd like to kind of delve more into who you are, who is Shai, for example. So if you can you give me a short summary of who you are?
Yeah, that's an interesting. Where do I start in sort of the history? How much time I have? I think keeping it relevant to the sort of Web3 and blockchain world. My history goes back something like 28 years, right? From general IT and general infrastructure, right? I've always, since very young age, I've always been curious about like bleeding edge technology. What's the opportunity for accelerating businesses, and how do you accelerate IT? And so in 2010, when just after the Bitcoin white paper was published in 2010, when I got around to building a Bitcoin miner, really digging into technology, really trying to understand what's going on there, that was like the start of everything. Because to me, at the time, there was something there. I couldn't quite put a finger on exactly what it was, but the idea of an overlay network on the financial side, on the computational side, there were so many opportunities. So I really wanted to dig into that space, really dig into the technology. And then getting into like 2017, we started having Ethereum and smart contracts, really diving further into that space, really digging into there, and then continue with that into 2020 and beyond. And for me, really looking at the last 10 to 15 years of my career in general, I think all the different infrastructure, software, business development, software development, everything that I've done in between, all these things have all in some ways led to where I am today in the blockchain Web3 world, which is this kind of amalgamation of all these different technologies and all these different skill sets. And so I think that's been my real fun joy is over my career of getting to jump in and out of different, not only different technology roles, but also different leadership type roles, all the way from like operations management to running a nonprofit to leading a motorcycle group. So just having so much different community over my past career, I think has really helped me really understand and accelerate in this space.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think if there's no other description of an OG, it has to be you. 2010 is, we always say, oh, we're early, but that is the definition of early. So yeah, that must have been such a long time ago for you to see like all of those innovations, but we have those still every single day coming out.
It is, and I think that's the exciting part is that we're still early, right? Like, I mean, you're laughing and saying that like, how early 2010 was, but in reality, this technology is still going to take another 10, 15 years before it actually materializes, right? And the way I look at it is, it's not about you or I, it's really about our kids. And that to me that's who I am, right? My kids are part of me, and so is my wife and everybody else, but the future is my kids. And so when I look at, the technology and what we're trying to do, ultimately we're trying to build a better world for our kids.
Yeah.
So we still have some time to go.
Yeah, no, we definitely have some time to go, but immutable data doesn't hurt anyone in any sense of the future. So no. It's good progress. And obviously you've been in this space now, like you were saying, in IT for 28 years, but in specifically blockchain for what now, the best part of 13, maybe 15 years?
13, yeah.
And I wonder, because I've been in it for best part of a year, I could really say maybe a year and a half, and I find it so difficult to almost keep motivated when everything's so turbulent. And I would say almost every 3 days something new happens. And so my question to you is, how have you been able to sustain 13 years of motivation when turbulence happens almost like every day?
Because to me, it's so much more than just blockchain, right? If we really simplify blockchain itself as an immutable ledger, that's just one piece of it. But
Yeah.
how it's being used, all the other technologies around it, all the other different ways of doing a blockchain ledger, right? There's so many different components to it. And then you get the technology part done, and you still have to figure out the tokenomics and the launch plan and all the other part of the marketing and deploying that particular product or that particular protocol. And so for me, over the last like 12 to 13 years, like you said, it's because I've always been curious about the adjacent spaces, right? Like I've always looked at blockchain as one area, but it's not been the area, right? Like it hasn't been my one area of focus. So I've said, okay, well, blockchain is there, but I need to understand databases. And so I dug into everything I can about databases, both relational databases, NoSQL databases, looked at storage, and then dug everything I can over storage over many years. And so I think that's really the important part, is really just understanding that blockchain is really just another piece of our technology stack. It's not the only part of the stack, right? And even if we talk about decentralization and all that stuff, it's still just part of it. So I think if you step back from that and you look at that, and then what you end up seeing is that all these little things that we hear in the news, all these things that we're hearing, either they're perspectives on really just an end use case, right? And what the issue is with the use case. It's not the underlying technology, or that it's more of one of the use cases really hasn't played out the way it's supposed to be, right? So it's not that there's anything wrong with it. It just didn't deliver on the promise that it would. But the underlying technology itself hasn't changed in that way, right? Because of the negative press, it's not changing the underlying technology. The tech itself still moves on. People still innovate in the space, right? And so I think when you're really focusing on that, on the tech and the innovation, I can't get bored. I'm just fired up and excited every day. I like laugh and giggle half the day because I'm just so excited about all this awesome stuff that's going on in this space.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, like we saw recently, the AWS and AVAX partnership, that's an amazing innovation, in my opinion. And I think usage of subnets is just going to supercharge so much in terms of business intelligence, business applications. And I can completely understand what you mean by when the underlying technology is there, the use cases, which may not play out in every single situation, or the actors who control those use cases may not be the best acting. That stuff happens, but at the end of the day, the tech is there. It's interesting. I can't believe you've been able to do it for 13 years, but I can understand how the tech keeps on driving you. But it's a tiring place to be.
But there's so much else around it, though. I mean, that's the thing, right? Because when you start peeling like one area of like just blockchain nodes, of like how a node operates on its own, you need to understand compute, you need to understand storage, you need to understand networking, right? So you really can go down so many different rabbit holes in this space, depending on where your interest lays in general IT and compute. It doesn't even have to be in blockchain specific. So I think it's the variety of life, right? Just keep things a variety, and I think that's what makes it fun.
Yeah. That's good advice in general, not just even about blockchain. And so obviously, discussing AWS, you've been there for now best part of 5 years, if I'm correct.
Almost 6 years, yeah. 5.5 years.
Yeah.
I'm just waiting for 6 years.
So tell me, why AWS, and how have you found it in terms of the last 6 years?
I mean, for me, it's amazing from a cultural perspective, right? I look at the leadership principles and I look at the way that I lead my life. And I think back to, 6 years ago when I first looked at the leadership principles before I even took the interview call. Those are just the things that I do as part of my normal day-to-day life. I normally, as part of my life, I like to dive deep into problems and try to understand them. I believe that if you go too far into a problem, I tell my kids, you can go a little bit, but you need to do something about it. You can't just sit there.
Yeah.
So for me, a lot of our leadership principles at Amazon really align with the way I live my life and the way I teach my kids, not only in the last 6 years, but even before that, right? I mean, my teen's 14, and that aligns with it. And the other part is, if we focus on technology, I mean, the fact that we're always empowered to look around corners on behalf of our customers, right? Like that's the most important thing, is looking on behalf of your customers. And so for me, like I saw an opportunity to get in this space on behalf of my customers, and I went and I did it. And I think that's the awesome thing at Amazon, is that when we recognize, or when somebody recognizes that there's an opportunity to make their customer's life better, however it might be, we never say no. We always say and it's funny. It's very similar to like a decentralized, Web3 world. We say, write a paper, pitch that paper, and then you can go and build it. And so I think that's the exciting part and why I love the culture is it's really about enabling and about really about looking around corners for customers. Yeah,
no, absolutely. I mean, I can testify to that. Even though I was only there for a much shorter time than you, 3 months, everything that we did was we lived and died by those leadership principles, and they're so well thought out and documented and practiced. Mm-hmm. When, for example, I would go to my manager with a certain issue, I had something to do with, I think it was an event that we were organizing. He was like, he obviously gave me his own personal advice, and he says, reflect back on the leadership principles. Those will guide you. And I did, and it made a lot of sense in that situation, especially, I think it was act and think quick.
And the relentless approach to customer obsession, right? Like, I mean, that's an example of like your manager looking at you as a customer, right? And how does he make you the best possible, right? And so like that's what we do on an everyday basis is just always obsess about the customer and how can we divide and conquer, deliver best for the customer.
Yeah, absolutely. And I even remember my time in my internship, I was able to work on so many different projects within the blockchain team. For example, I could, although obviously it's not my own work stream and I don't own it and I'm not the owner on that, I'm able to sit in on a call, if possible, feed into that work stream, help give my thoughts. And I think one thing that was great to see is that whole ownership mentality. I really enjoyed being able to say, hey, I've got this new product. I'm able to build it. Write your white paper, write whichever document format you prefer, and then go and run away with it.
Yeah, and everybody has an equal say. That's definitely a good point there.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great plus of, I mean, not just AWS, but the whole of Amazon. Cool. I mean, I guess we can move on to the next section, which is the quick fire round, as I like to call it. So, what would be your top tip to someone who, quote unquote, is a noob to blockchain?
So if they're new to blockchain, I think the most important thing is get that hands-on experience, right? Like actually understand what it is and actually use it, right? Like it's good to read about theory and understand all these things, but the simplest way to do it is just get a wallet. Just get some wallet from whatever partner you choose, whatever solution you like. Download that wallet. Go, if you want to go down the gaming route, go play some blockchain games, or go play some, if you want to go down the money route, go down the DeFi route. But at least gain that experience of what it's like to have a wallet. If you want to go down the route of, let's say, social applications and like see what it's like to use a decentralized social client, you can go down that path, right? So I think find the app or use case that's of curious to you and just start playing in the space. I think that's what it's about, right? It's really experiencing the wallet. And I think once you experience the wallet experience of like signing into websites and conducting a transaction on chain, I think that's where the hugest value. The other part I'll add is that when you go do a transaction, don't just do the transaction and forget about it. Go click on the Explorer link and go look at the Explorer and start digging around there and see like the details that you can see in the transaction, the contract itself. Like dig into the Explorer. There's so much information there that I think that's a good way to get started and like really get your toes into the space. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'll go one step further. And I'd actually argue one of the best first things you can do in blockchain is do a multi-chain bridge, purely because you interact with two different types of chains. You understand how the bridging, or you can have a look at the bridging logic and how it works. And it's just quite cool to see, to look at two different explorers. It's just quite fun. Yeah, I would say that's the second thing to do. As the second, I don't know if I'd say the first thing, but the second thing to do is definitely that, because you're right. When you look at the transaction on both chains, the other part that really hits you is this is kind of like a bank wire, right? Yeah. And then when you go back, and this is what kind of hurts, is when you go back and start doing bank wires again, you're like, wait, why does this take 24 hours? Shouldn't this just take a couple of seconds or like a few minutes? Where's the bank's Block Explorer? Like I've actually called my bank and asked them if they've had Block Explorer. I know that they don't. But just for fun, right? And that's the thing is like you get this sense of like, wait, I have visibility, the full transaction throughout. I can see everything that's happening the whole way through. And then you go back to the traditional world and you're like, where is that transparency? And you get the answer of like, no, it's not there. Come back tomorrow. So I think that's hugely empowering, right?
Yeah, no, super. I mean, I obviously my prayers go out to the people of Turkey and Syria
Hmm.
at the minute, and I saw I wrote a Medium article a while back when there was quite a lot of flooding in Pakistan, and looking at how Ukraine were able to like raise an amazing war fund of over like 65 million it was at one point, um, just simply through cryptocurrencies and NFTs was incredible. And I argue in that article that every single country going through any type of crisis should have a wallet. And I mean, in general, even if it's cross-border settlement, cross-border transactions, I think having a wallet doesn't hurt at all. So
It's hugely
yeah,
empowering. It's
yeah,
it's hugely empowering to the individual country, individual nation, or whatever it might be, to be able to control their own destiny in that way.
yeah,
So,
absolutely. We see. I saw recently as well. Tether released that they're going to enable withdrawals of Tether in 24,000 ATMs in Brazil, which I think is fantastic. That's incredibly increasing financial access to, honestly, millions of people that probably are either underbanked or unbanked in some more rural regions in Brazil. So
yeah.
yeah, definitely that transparency is there.
I think we forget sometimes the privilege that we have in some of the countries, right, where we can just go to an ATM and pull out cash at any moment. And it's a privilege that we really take for granted because we've been doing it since we've been kids and had our credit card. Like I had a card when I was 13, but in
Mm,
a lot of countries you can't do that, and you don't have
yeah,
access to that cash, right? The bank's not available all the time, so
yeah.
there's a huge empowerment there that you're 100% correct on.
Cool. Touching on the point of the top tip being getting a wallet and maybe doing a transaction, and looking at an explorer, what would you say is your favorite DeFi protocol at the minute?
It's hard to name one specific one. My favorite category, I'll take that, is dexes.
Okay.
I
Okay.
love the idea of a dexes, right? Because you have an AMMs and you have the things that the AMMs do, but the idea of dexes being able to take multiple AMMs, right, or multiple protocols underneath them and sort of aggregate the best price, the best route, the best gas fees and all that stuff. To me, I think
Hmm.
is hugely like that's like the next level of sort of the primitives that we need in this space.
Yeah.
Because then what that enabled is all these, you mentioned like bridges before, but the really cool part that we're seeing now is cross bridging dexes,
Yeah.
right? So now we've combined them both together, and now you can be on one chain, completely some random asset. Let's say it's the fake Shai coin and the fake Ved coin on the other chain. And
Yeah.
now you can very easily, as a user, do that exchange across that bridge and across the dexes. And
Yeah.
if we didn't have the dexes to begin with that know how to do the order routing across all the different AMMs, we couldn't
Hmm.
do that, right? And so it's hard to pick one dex because we kind of need them all in a
Yeah.
sense, because the more routes and the more routes we have, right, the more aggregators we have, the better the bridges that sit on top of those routes will be.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of like, we don't need 1,000 dexes, but we need at least a good number of competition in the market to improve the order routing and order booking.
Yeah. No, I mean, definitely. I saw. Oh God, I really forget the name. I saw an order book technology piece that came out the other day, where it created an entire on-chain order book for a DEX and was able to transact, I believe, like 1,000 transactions per second, and for high frequency needs. Obviously, in this context, we're talking about investing and financial
Well, this just
uses.
but it's transaction. You that's
Yeah.
a use case of it, right? But what you're talking about really is high transaction throughput, which is that's the challenge, is that we don't have that on a lot of chains, right? There's a few chains out there that have that, and likely by the end of the year we will see that throughput go up significantly higher on many of the chains that we're seeing. So
Yeah.
by the end of the year, you're talking about one example of an order book, right, which needs a high, but by the end of the year, and we have more chains out there, we should have many more order book options, right?
Yeah.
So even better, right now you can build a centralized exchange, decentralized exchange, whatever you want on top of those things, and it's even more of an efficient capital market now. So
Yeah.
we're only getting better.
Way more efficient. I saw in El Salvador, actually, they have a provider called Acumen who, in particular, use AVAX now to do their loanage for crypto, which is great to see that they're able to do that and so efficiently. Now you kind of answered it earlier, but I'll push you on a 30-second hard stop. can you explain in 30 seconds what is a node?
Now you're
3,
doing this given that
2,
you know I presented on this for an hour. So
yeah, true.
okay, start the countdown again. Let's see.
3, 2, 1, go.
So a blockchain node is really nothing more than a compute instance, right? And that compute can be anywhere on your desk. It can be in a server. It can be on your phone, or it can be on your laptop. That compute instance does nothing more than run a client on it most of the time. And that client is where all the secret sauce and the magic happens. Now, in a blockchain node, you got to remember there's read nodes, and there's observer nodes, and there's nodes that actually participate in a transaction. Done.
Okay, nice.
About 30 seconds.
That was a good roundup. That you even had like a good 4 seconds to spare there.
Yes.
That's
26
good.
seconds.
That's good.
I narrowed down an hour to 26 seconds. I'm happy.
You deserve that one there. Yeah, I mean, I also I've kind of been more and more looking into nodes because we're kind of building out some wallet infrastructure, and we're looking at how nodes compete with each other and how they can kind of being used for withdrawals and depositing off and on exchanges. And it's fascinating. They're incredibly complicated technology, but they're incredibly intricate and, at the end of the day, logical piece of technology, I would argue, which is really cool to see.
Yeah.
Good summary.
That's the area that I geek out on the most, right? Because when we talk about the foundational part of Web3 and blockchain and all the stuff that we're building, if there's no node, none of that stuff can exist. Like you're not running it on a blockchain if there's no blockchain node. So it's like one of the most foundational pieces that you can get to without getting into the networking layer and the storage layer and the actual hardware, if you will, underneath that layer.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it's important that people really take the time to understand what a node is and that there's different types of nodes in each network. I think that's the important thing.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, there's so many different types of nodes. I know, obviously coming up, we're going to have Shanghai Unlock, where people can unvalidate ETH and unstake it for the first time since 2020. So it's so interesting to see the importance of peer nodes being run, not just from the sense of the actual network being run, it's also from the sense of an element of decentralization when you have distributed validators rather than one centralized point of validation. Yeah, cool. This, once again, maybe you can't answer the exact, but maybe you can answer the type. What's your favorite wallet provider or your favorite wallet providing type in terms of non-custodial or custodial?
Well, so I am a self-custody geek. I believe in self-custody my own assets, right? So that said, again, I understand that not everybody has that privilege. Right? I have the privilege of being able to have a safe and all those things and live in a safe neighborhood. So I get that we can't all self-custody. But I can't pick a favorite wallet either because I keep switching between different ones. And I think that's kind of the important thing is that there's different wallet experiences out there that different builders are building to experiment with what wallet experience works and what doesn't. And I think if we get too tied to one wallet, then we're not really pushing the developers to try new things and build things. And the wallet experience is what needs to improve the best or the most. I mean, we're not going to get my mom using Web3 and blockchain if she has to go through the current wallet experiences.
Yeah.
Right. There's all these, sort of Web2 wallets that are acting like Web3 wallets. I think that's a huge promise out there. But again, just the user experience themselves has to be much more simpler. Like it has to be at the level of like social media and where we're at with, it's got to be as easy as a social media post. Like that's the point of where it needs to be. And it's the wallet experience that needs to get better at that. So to me, I'm excited though, because we see a lot of that building happening, right? You see a lot of the open source wallet development happening out there, which means that people are going to build on top of that and we're going to build on top of that, right? And then the hardware wallets play into that. And so I think it'll be a particularly interesting year as we see a lot of the software side of the wallet come together with the hardware side. And we're seeing that in things like QR codes and NFC tags, being able to much easier use a hardware wallet as a hot wallet, because that's the other challenge, right? Is that hot wallet. So I think we'll get to see a lot more of those. I'm just going to keep geeking out with my hardware wallets too.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, it's so interesting to see the differences between a hot, warm, and cold wallet, and the differences in how things are cryptographically secured, and the level of security and the level of being able to move those assets easily. It's really interesting. And I think, definitely self-custody is, I would argue, another top tip to anyone who's further down their journey, as one could say. An interesting question I had that you kind of preluded to there, where we're talking about hot wallets and cold wallets, or warm wallets and cold wallets. When you look at a wallet provider or just using a wallet, obviously single point of failure is another tip, which you kind of also suggested, which is not using one provider and using multiple, ensuring that you have that safety. When you look at a wallet, is security more important for you, or do you think UI is more important? And which do you think would be more important to onboard the masses?
Well, to onboard the masses, got to be UI, but I don't think it can be at a sacrifice of security, right? It's a very tricky thing, because if we prioritize UI but we sacrifice the security, then we're not really getting any of the benefits that we're getting from the Web3 world and the whole public infrastructure that we're building. Yeah. For me personally, right, I always lean to security, because I can deal with a bad UI, right? I can deal with a subpar UI experience. So yeah. I'm willing to sacrifice that, though. However, I think that's what we need to do. I think we need to keep that security in mind and just say, how do we move forward and continue improving that security with that in mind, right? And that's why I was bringing up the QR codes before, because that's what that's allowing us to do, right? It's taking the whole cold wallet concept and making it so that it's easy to use with something like QR codes, which people are now familiar with, and they know how to use QR codes, right? And so we get the benefit of a wallet that is a cold wallet. It's not connected, right? But we also get the benefit of a UI experience where it's like QR codes, where people get it. Okay, like I signed in on the device, now I just need to scan the QR code with my phone. Like that's a familiar experience that they're used to. And so it retains that security while improving the UI experience. And again, that's why we need the wallet providers, because we just need more of that experimentation.
Yeah, no, I mean, absolutely. I think QR is a massive step in order to help those masses, because it's such a familiar piece of tech for so many people. And I think it's another thing where people understand that that's a transmission mechanism that is the norm, and it's not something that they're not used to. Like, for example, when I've I had a really funny day the other day. Me and a friend were building some back-end logic for a friend's idea, which was, can you connect your gamer tag to your wallet and therefore create, for example, me and you say, hey, I'm going to win the next race in this game. And we can connect our gamer tags and a API to your wallet, and therefore the winner gets whatever you want to stake up. And we were looking at it, and I asked him, I'm going to transfer you this so that we can figure it out and like test the back end logic. And I fat fingered 3 times, which is admittedly my fault. But the fact that it's not like an address book, you have to put in the addresses. Now that you have the ability to save addresses, which is really cool, and I think massive improvement. But I still think it's so easy to get that wrong. And when you look at gas optimizations, where you can alter block sizes and you can maybe get that wrong, and then the gas goes up astronomically, there are lots of UI things which I can agree with you there.
Yeah. So, yeah. And we're seeing that improve, though. I mean, that's the nice thing, is like we compare it just to last year, and we're already seeing a lot of that user experience improve. And I think important from the security side, right? Because it's taking away a lot of those underlying nuance, the nuance, the block size, all those things that we had to worry about. And now what's replaced in most of the wallets is a warning about the contract, right? If there's sort of no idea if the contract has been scanned, or if the contract looks malicious, or if the contract is possibly similar to another contract that was malicious in the past, the software wallets are getting smart enough where they'll actually warn you. So that, to me, is something that's exciting from like a user perspective, because it makes it much easier for that user. Right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah. That's very true. And my final question to you is, what is arguably, or maybe your favorite again, analytics tool within the entire world of crypto, whether that be on-chain, an Oracle application, or whatever it may be?
I'm gonna go with the Explorers again, because one
Okay.
is there's a lot of good analytics tools out there, but either A, they cost money, right? They're behind some sort of API paywall. They require
Hmm.
some sort of either development experience, or they require some sort of visualization experience. We kind of have to understand it. And to me,
Yeah.
when you look at the Explorers, they don't require any of that, right? You just go log and explore, and you can go log and see the blocks, and all that analytical data is there. It's telling you about the network. It's telling you about the number of validators on the network, how many transactions it's running through, what's the most
Yeah.
active contract, what's the most active public address. There's so much information on there that you can gain so much insights as to the health of not just the network, but a protocol on that network just by looking at the Explorer.
Yeah.
And then from there, then I think you're taking into other analytics tools, depending on what it is that you're trying to do, right? Are you trying to do contract analysis? And then there's a whole bunch of smart contract analysis tools that are really looking for, is this contract a valid contract? Is it malicious? And then you have contracts that will, or scanning tools that will assess it for the liquidity of it, right? Can you actually buy or sell this token? And then you have other ones that will scan for social activity and will tell you, how much, social activity is there for that particular token on what particular social platform, and how engaged they are in that platform. So it really depends what you're after, right? What kind of analytical data you're after. And I think if you're the tech geek like I am, start at the Explorer. It's just the best place to geek out on.
Yeah. No, I think there's so much exploration you can do. Even if you were to use a tool, an analytics tool, I don't think it'd be as raw. I think the word is to dissect what that smart contract is offering you. I think a really cool one to actually explore that I sometimes say to people who are just starting out is USDC, because it's hidden. I mean, as looking at what smart contracts are, and understanding why it's hidden and why you can't actually see that smart contract is really interesting to understand the product and the mindset behind it, and then comparing it to maybe something like Tether, where you can understand more of the details. And I think that's really interesting. I agree with scanners being probably one of the coolest tools to use.
Yeah, and it's funny when you go to like a new blockchain network. That's the new funnest thing, is go look at their Explorer and see how their Explorer differs from other networks.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Cool. Although that wasn't very quick fire, it was the quick fire round. So, we'll move more into Amazon Web Services and Web3 and how they cross over as worlds. What do you see the future of AWS customers being within Web3?
So I think the customers continue to explore the space. There just continues to be that exploration, and all the FUD and all the bad market conditions that we had last year have actually cleaned up the space, where now customers are not just coming at it from like an NFT perspective. They're looking at utility. They're looking at the different blockchain networks that are out there. They're trying to understand how to deploy on there. And so I think that's the exciting part for me, is that both Web 2 customers as well as Web 3 customers are eagerly exploring the space and trying to understand where does it make sense for them, right? They're looking at blockchain as a distributed ledger, and they're saying, okay, well, if it is a public database of sorts, what can I do with it?
Yeah.
And the other big part as well is that there's always going to be customers looking for that hybrid use case, right? So they're looking for, how do I move from my traditional silo databases into a public world? And they're looking for those hybrid use cases. And that's where the different ZK technologies come in, the zero knowledge proof, right? Being able to validate something that exists on-prem with a public proof. That's also where there's a lot of customers that are just looking at how do they move and migrate in that like sort of hybrid architecture way.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm seeing particularly a lot of.
Yeah, no, I think ZK rollups are definitely going to unlock a lot greater business intelligence applications, and that flow that you just described there of being able to unlock or validate or undertake some sort of automated action with on-prem data through ZK rollups is that's almost next level.
Yeah, and I think the way that they're looking at it is like all these different Web3 primitives, right? How do we use them as part of the architecture, right? It's so nice to see the conversation shift, where Web3 is a part of the overall delivery that they're trying to do. It's not just a Web3 strategy, like, hey, we just need to deliver an NFT. It's how does an NFT play into the bigger strategy that we're trying to deliver of whatever product is we're trying to deliver. So that's really what's nice, is seeing that that much deeper thought through of a product.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, there's also going to be so many products that use blockchain in the coming years. So, yeah, cool. And coming back onto your background and kind of giving some context to the listeners, that you have been here for 13 years, given that probably a lot of the listeners, and including myself, will have been here maximum, I'd say, probably 3-4 years at tops. And given that you've seen crypto being the main use case, I would argue, for the past 10 years or so, and given that Bitcoin was obviously the birth of mainstream knowledge of blockchain, what do you see being the main use of blockchain in the next 10 years, or in the next 20, 30, 40, 50?
Yeah, so I think for me, the really exciting part is that return of ownership back to the users, right? We talked about my kids a little bit in the beginning, and that value of what does it mean to have an immutable database and an immutable ledger that now, are sort of, the records go on forever and they can't be changed. And when I think of my kids in the future, if we take something like zero knowledge proofs as a simple example, and we take a simple example of like working in a factory, the fact that somebody can walk into a factory and be able to say, I am certified to work on that equipment. Let's say it's a welding station, right? They are certified to work on that welding station. The tool corral unlocks automatically to give them the welder that they're allowed to weld with. And then in the supply closet, the welding iron or material that they need, it's only unlocked the material that they need specifically for that welder. Now, all we know is that welder is certified. We know that they've been through school, but we don't need to know what grades they got. We don't need to know how long they went to school. We don't know what school. So, all this underlying information that today we willy-nilly disclose out there, in many cases that they don't need to know, that to me is the exciting part. Is 10 years from now, it's a much more privacy-focused world for our kids, but also a world where they can be enabled to do more things because they don't need to give out as much information. So now they're not as hesitant to try things or go to different places, because when someplace says, oh, what's your age? They don't need to show the whole entire driver license and show everything. They can just say, well, what do you need to know? Oh, I'm 25. I can rent a car. Okay, well, here's proof that I'm 25. You don't need to know how old I am. You just need to know that I'm older than 25. You just need to know that I don't have any accidents on my record. That's it. So that level of privacy for me is really exciting, and sort of what we build on top of that is, I think, going to enable the future of things like flex work, as a simple example. I mean, in that accountability, while still being able to be anonymous, I think is hugely empowering to a future society.
Yeah, no, I mean, completely. I think it's really interesting, the idea of just on one of the points you made about decentralized identity. I think it's such a complex, and I'd actually argue at this point, it's somewhat an ethical question in some use cases. And I think that is going to be an interesting debate that we're going to see play out in the next 10 years, particularly with identity. I think with ownership, I think we've reached that point where people have really understood that, hey, we use platforms, and the platforms should realistically entitle us to what we share on that platform.
Yeah, and I think that's the part I'm excited about is the whole soulbound token stuff, and we'll see where that's going. Being able to not transfer an asset or basically burn an asset. I think there's so much potential in the identity space, but I want to get back to your question, because you also said in 50 years. And I want to pick maybe a more fun example as well, right? Gaming to me is really huge, because I think with all the stuff that we're seeing in the generative AI and machine learning stack, in addition to blockchain, I think that really makes up what Web3 is. It's really about generative AI, machine learning, and blockchain. And when we look at that stack overall, and we look at the future, we say, well, that kind of flips the whole creator economy on its head altogether. Because I think of this really cool world where I can have a car that's defined in one world, and I soup up that car, enable that car, I do all the things I want with that car in that world, and then I take that car to another world, And even though it's a red sports car in one world, in the other world, it might be like a cherry glistening neon red or something. And the
Yeah.
car may sound slightly different because of the upgrades, right? And so it's that ability for creators to now take assets that are out there in the public, if you will. Again, not completely open in the public, but at least
Hmm.
assets that are no longer siloed in a particular vendor. And now,
Yeah.
as a creative, as an artist, what can you do with that?
Yeah.
And I love all the NFT projects that we're seeing. That, again, we have to remember it's the early days, but all
Hmm.
these things that we're seeing about like mutational NFTs, where
Yeah.
somebody creates an art piece and then somebody mutates that and creates another art piece and mutates again, creates an art piece. That
Yeah.
generative art, just think about that in the gaming world. That is hugely empowering to
Yeah.
assets in game.
Yeah. 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 No, um, I think it's so interesting to see that play out in so many other ways. Like I can think of one being skins. If you're
Mm-hmm.
able to generate skins and I customize skins and then pass them on, and then your friend's able to change the color, but it's one of, for example, it's your clan's entire design, but each of you are like Power Rangers, for example.
Yeah.
Um, it unlocks so much, and I think obviously we talk about the metaverse quite a lot, and I think it's quite a hot topic. I'd argue with more businesses actually than I'd expected by this point. Um, a lot of the flex work stuff I've been seeing recently is to do with the metaverse. It's to do with being virtual avatars, going around a meeting room and being able to whiteboard with someone
Yeah.
virtually. But it's just an entire world of virtual reality that you just could never have imagined probably 10 years ago, but all being unlocked through blockchain and the metaverse.
And that's the important thing. Is like we don't need blockchain in order to have metaverse. I mean, we've had it since I think it was like '86 or something with the game called The Palace. So we've had metaverses before. I played was it Sims as a kid, and like
Yeah.
we've had this stuff. So the whole point is like it's the when the data is unlocked out of that locked economy, what can you now do with that data? When you can take that
Yeah.
data and move it across different worlds and stuff, like that's what's hugely empowering. That I think is the important part of blockchain and web and metaverses.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Um, on that topic of blockchain versus metaverse versus crypto, um, we'll go to the next section because I think that's interesting. I think it's a good segue. Um, I think obviously one thing that we've discussed is change layer ones and the variability of how people use blockchain in itself. I know it's quite, I guess, a controversial topic, but do you think chain maximalism or being chain agnostic is a positive as a mechanism to decentralize resources because you're spreading transactions and you're able to have different specialities for different chains, and therefore it allows that decentralization? Or do you think maximalism will play out and there will be one dominant chain, and almost in an egotistical manner, people will choose that chain to be a fully locked value place almost?
So maximalism in general can be a very dangerous thing, right? And we've seen in the ecosystem where where that maximism and the idolization have actually backfired on chains, right? Because of either
Yeah.
personalities or something like that. And so I really believe that the future is a multi-chain world. You can't be a maximalist on one or two chains. You can
Yep.
believe in, let's say, one or two chains having a particular use case, and that's fine. But you also have to recognize that there's plenty of other chains that will do that use case or another use case much better than that chain you're looking at. And so
Yeah.
ultimately, I think the future will be a future of, and let's use databases as a similar architecture, right? Or even storage
Yeah.
as a similar architecture. I think we said recently there's 600 EC2 instances available in AWS, right? People want choice. I
Yeah.
think that's what we've only seen, right? People just want choice. So
Yeah.
it's going to be a future of multi-chain because of that choice, because people want to be able to choose, okay,
Mhm.
I have this particular kind of workload. It's a gaming app. It's a trading application. Where does it make the most sense to do that, right? We were talking
Mhm.
about that high frequency trading. That doesn't maybe make next sense if you just need a really simple game that you're playing. It's like a card trading game. You don't
Yeah.
need that high frequency trading. So why would you go down that path, right? You go
Hmm.
down a path with the chain that offers you better tooling to build your
Yeah.
game. And I think
Yeah.
that's what we'll only see more and more of the future. And I think as technologists, we have to be open-minded. We can't be closed-minded, right? We have to think about multi-chains and most importantly, the bridges that you said before. How do you
Yeah.
connect those bridges together? Because if a chain is sitting on its own, it's a chain island and it doesn't matter how much TVL is locked in that chain if it's
Yeah.
an island and it's not really connected to the rest of the ecosystem.
I have a question on that actually. Obviously, there's a few mechanisms that you can do to solve the issue of interoperability. There's lots coming out recently about communication mechanisms, bridging, for example, like we discussed with certain assets. What do you see playing out as the kind of dominant mechanism to have that interoperability? Because for me, I would argue a lot of it would be some level of communication, whether that be communicative cryptography or whether that be some level of communication that's rooted in a kind of automated function. I'd say that would be the biggest way that it'd play out, but I'd like to get your take.
So I think we have to make it easier for the developers, right? Like it's a counter discussion, right? Because on one side, I just said that we need a lot more chains out there, right? And it's good to have a lot of chains. But on the other hand, that's actually a bad thing for developers because then developers don't know which chains to choose. So I think that's the important part is making that developer experience much easier so that when you're coming on board and you're just wanting to mint an NFT, that's like all you want to do is just mint an NFT for
Mm-hmm.
whatever reason, right? That's what you're trying to do because it aligns with your product or protocol that you're trying to push out. So you don't need to know all the underlying primitives of that chain. And
Yeah.
so I look forward to the days, and when we have some developer tooling like this already, where you can go out there and you say, I want to mint an NFT, you can check off which chains you want to deploy it on, and it will
Mm-hmm.
deploy it to that chain. Or if you're deploying it to multiple chains, we'll set up the bridge for you so that you can move those assets between bridges as you need to. So
Yeah.
I think that developer tooling layer needs to simplify that underlying chain mishmash, if you will, that we're going to have in the future and help developers understand how to navigate that space.
Yeah. Yeah. No, completely. I kind of see the EVM being as a like almost not really, but it's
Not
allowing for
real.
multiple chains
But
to be
but but
used.
it's a false sense of compatibility because even
Yeah.
if the chain claims EVM compatibility, there could be an opcode that they didn't carry from Ethereum, or worse, they decided to deploy another opcode that Ethereum didn't deploy. So
Yeah.
now, as a developer, you think you have parity and you believe you do until your contract doesn't work on another chain because they don't support that opcode.
Yeah.
Right? These are silly things that developers shouldn't have to think about, right? Like you don't
Yeah.
think about these things when you're developing Node.js or Python. You just develop in
Yeah.
Node.js and you go and deploy your Node.js application wherever you want to, right?
Yeah.
That's the kind of level that we need to get to, right? And that's what developers are expecting.
Yeah. No, I think also it makes the consumer experience so much easier because you're not burdening the developers. You have that interoperability, and that makes sense. Cool. And kind of on that topic where we're talking about wallets, layer twos, layer ones, we've kind of seen this narrative play out of. I would argue 2022 being the year of clashing exchanges and rivaling exchanges. I would argue 2021 being rivaling layer twos and looking at higher TPS. What do you see being this year's kind of big rivalry or big point of competition?
So I have to point to the bridge wars, just
Okay.
because we I think the whole bridging is going to turn into bridging and multi-chain messaging, right?
Okay.
How do I bridge assets, but also how do I do multi-chain messaging for other use cases that's not asset at all related, right? Like the social media example
Mm-hmm.
before that we're talking about, right? A social media client really should be a multi-chain client. It's kind of silly if it only lives on one chain or only pulls data from one chain. And
Mm-hmm.
so the whole idea of doing multi-chain messaging is actually really hard today because not only do you have to have node access to each chain, you have to know finale on each chain, you have to watch the contract of each chain, did the transaction complete or not. There's all these little nuances that you have to be aware of. And so we saw a couple of protocols come out last year. I think we're going to see a lot more come out this year that are really going to streamline the whole bridging and multi-chain experience so that as a
Yeah.
developer, again, it's going to take that nuance and that headache away from you underneath so you don't have to think about those things anymore.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I think it's interesting to see also the wallet wars, see how they'll play out because I think a lot of the stuff that's come out recently about obviously MetaMask having tracking IP addresses on some level of transactions, and that privacy versus UI debate, I think that's going to be the pinpoint of who wins that war and who can strike that perfect balance. I think that would be really cool to see to play out as alongside the bridging wars.
So I agree, right? But that's to me that's a decentralization war that we've been talking along for a long time, and it's not really a war. It's a slider, right? Like you're going to use the wallet that gives you the level of decentralization that you want to, right? And if you don't like that one of them is tracking IPs, then you need to slide that slider whichever direction it is for you. That means more decentralization and go to a different wallet provider that maybe doesn't have that slick UI, but is much more secure and doesn't do any of that tracking and uses the Tor network on the back end or something like that, right? Like, so you need to decide what that makes sense to you, right? Whereas the bridge wars, I think is going to be the same thing, but it's interesting to see how protocols adopt those bridges, because we've already seen where bridges are part of a governance vote, and a governance vote can fail or not just based on the bridge underneath. And there's sort of turmoil in that governance vote for which bridge do we go for. So I think it'll be particularly interesting this year.
Yeah, no, for sure. We'll be stood here seeing every single bit of it. So that's what we like to hear. Another thing that I've seen, obviously, you put on social media about, and I think something that you're quite passionate about, I'd argue, is digital government as well as digital identity and kind of marrying the world of blockchain into everyday life. And obviously, a lot of this lies in the fact that the mass market has to be appealed to join blockchain and to get involved. And I wonder what your take could be on what is the easiest point of entry for the mass public to enter into blockchain, and where you think that will be in the next 5 years. Do you think, I mean, I would put one out there and say CBDCs, but I wonder what you have to say.
Well, so it depends. If we say are the users onboarded via a sort of institutional program, or are users being onboarded because of a particular use case that they're being driven of, right? And so I think the whole digital identity stuff, particularly, which is what will drive a lot of users, right? Like the case of being able to have your health records and being able to control who has access to your health records, right? That will drive a lot of users. You'll have use cases like that. And there's already states that we're seeing that are implementing these solutions where those citizens are adopting those blockchain applications because they see value in it, right? They see value in a digital ID that they don't have to go to every place and show their physical ID. They can just scan a QR code or scan an NFC tag. And now their digital ID can say that they really are over 21 or really are over 25.
Yeah.
Right? So we're already seeing that play out where it's kind of like you're kind of forced to, in a sense, because the government adopted that technology. And you're like, where's the blockchain? And you don't know, right? And that's kind of the point, is it's underneath everything. So in the government use cases of CDBCs and those kind of things, and I'm in general of one that I think there will be CBDCs and there will not be CDBCs. It's going to be a world of mixture of both. And I think they're okay and they're not okay. It just really depends on how you look at it, right? You can always see both sides to something. And so I think ultimately those countries that do implement the CBDCs, those will onboard the people onto blockchain. But that's like saying like 400 years ago when they minted the first, like 200 years ago when they minted the first dollar, did that bring everybody onto the currency? Like, no, people have slowly started adopting that dollar and using that currency. And I think that's what will happen, or we won't even know it because it'll be under the hood and everything.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm aware that we're running out of time, so I'm going to ask you two quick ones. One that I guess we can answer quicker, and the other one that will be harder to answer. So to start with this one, so we obviously have this whole debate about throughput and TPS, and how we can best do high throughput. Do you see that solution being layer 2, sharding, streamlining through API upgrades, or how do you see the solution of throughput?
Yeah, so I think what will happen specific to Ethereum, right, because the layer 2s are all about scaling out Ethereum, right? So Ethereum, for the time being, until the sharding actually happens, needs that scaling, right? If we get to a case again where we have a lot of throughput on Ethereum and gas fees goes up again, not because of the high gas cost, but just because of the performance level of Ethereum, right? The transaction finality time, the TPS you're talking about, We need those layer twos for speeding up Ethereum, right? For making Ethereum more usable at an enterprise at a higher throughput level. Now, what I'm thinking, right, is that as we evolve and we have more and more blockchains out there, and those layer ones on their own have a higher throughput, either because they're just less people and less activity on that chain, or because of the technical architecture, it's a more efficient chain, the need for those layer twos, I think, will go down. So ultimately, I think the future is really going to be like in the sharding. But I'm confident that the layer twos will sort of find their place where it makes most sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
Either be like a multi-chain layer two, or there'll still be value to that layer two.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think sharding is the solution, and we'll see what people come out with. It'll be interesting to see that in probably 2024. That may be the next war. And final one, and this is, once again, we kind of answered it throughout, but your very, very quick answer. Where does the future of blockchain lie, in your opinion?
Sorry.
Oh, good. Good.
So to me, I mean, when we talk about the future of blockchain, really lies in the tools that keep being built on top of it, right? Blockchain by itself is nothing more than a public database. There's more to it than that, right? But if we simplify it, that's all it is. So what are the things that are going to be built on top of it, right? What are the smart contracts and how those new smart contracts can be developed? The new smart contract languages that are coming out that are actually taking much more efficient usage of the distributed compute layer. And then the other part that we still don't really have in wide masses is really distributed storage. We have distributed storage protocols. We certainly do. And they have multiple petabytes, if not exabytes of storage. But being said, it's not something that we're actively seeing in everyday uses where distributed storage is being used. And so I think that's really the area that we'll keep seeing improvement on, is really just distributed storage and efficient storage, because that's the problem. We can't keep wasting hard drive space. So it's all about doing distributed storage in an efficient way that is going to reduce the underlying amounts of data that we're actually storing. So either deduplication or compression, whatever we need. But I think that's probably the next one in the next couple of years, specific to blockchain.
Yeah, no, I think definitely, even looking from a sustainability standpoint, memory usage comes at cost in any sense of the world. So definitely solving that and making sure that maybe how the nodes operate or how the nodes compress the data that they hash is important.
Yep.
But cool. That was a good old conversation. That was a long old conversation. But I really appreciate your time, Shai. Thank you so much for coming on. Thank you so much for talking through to the listeners and me and educating us so much on real OG knowledge from almost 13 years. So really appreciate it. And it's always great to chat.
Yeah, same here. I appreciate the questions. Look forward to the next one. Thank you for having me on.
Thanks so much, Shai. Take care.
Bye, see ya.